Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a question that honestly feels incredibly relevant, maybe now more than ever. It echoes through time, really, when everything seems to be falling apart, when the foundations crumble and fear is whispering, maybe even shouting, in your ear. Do you stand firm? Or do you? Well, do you flee? We're going to be diving deep into a really powerful ancient text today, Psalm 11. And we're using a recent study as our guide. It's titled MCS Psalm 11, and it asks that exact question, faith or flight. So our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to really pull out the insights from David's own struggle, his timeless wisdom. What does it actually mean to face overwhelming odds, and where truly is refuge found?
And what's so fascinating here, I think, is just how relevant these ancient words still are. This isn't just some history lesson. It feels more like a guide, really, for navigating our own crises. It makes you stop and think, about your own choices when things feel like they're turning against you.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. So the study, it kicks things off by setting up this really stark choice, faith or flight. It basically makes the point that, well, we all have to make a choice when faced with evil as to whether we stand in faith or flee in fear. So how does Psalm 11, right at the start, kind of set the stage for this dilemma?
Well, the very first verses, Psalm 11, verses 1 to 3, they plunge you right in. David starts with this incredibly bold statement, "In Adonai I find refuge." But then immediately you hear the voices of presumably his advisors, maybe his friends, saying something totally different. They're telling him, flee like a bird to the mountains.
Like get out, basically.
Exactly. See how the wicked are drawing their bows, setting their arrows on the string to shoot from the shadows and honest men. It's urgent. It's specific. And then they hit him with that killer question. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? It's like they're saying, David, your faith is nice, but look at reality. Everything's collapsing.
And the study gives us some crucial background here, doesn't it? To really feel the weight of this. This isn't just like abstract danger. It likely comes from this terrifying time in David's life when his own son, Absalom, was actually trying to overthrow him, take the kingdom.
Right. And Absalom wasn't just some minor threat. The study points out his history. This is a guy who had already killed his younger half-brother, Amnon. He was exiled. David eventually led him back into Jerusalem. Big mistake, it seems. Because Absalom, apparently full of pride, just started plotting against his own father.
Wow. From his own son.
Yeah. So when David's advisors are telling him to flee, they're not just being paranoid. They're looking at a ruthless, proven killer who's actively leading a rebellion. And it raises this really important question for all of us, I think. When you're facing that kind of betrayal, something so personal, so dangerous, what's the gut reaction? What's the natural human thing to do?
So faced with that, intense pressure and this very specific, very personal threat, what did David actually do initially? Did that "in Adonai I find refuge" hold up right away?
Well, this is where it gets really relatable, and the study points this out. When David got the news, the intelligence report saying that people were actually siding with Absalom, his first reaction, he decided to flee.
He fled.
He did. The study sort of frames it as him giving in to worldly advice, choosing physical safety over maybe standing firm in that initial declaration of faith.
Wow. That's a really powerful detail, because you think of David, the giant slayer, the man after God's own heart, and yet in that moment of intense fear and betrayal, he ran.
Exactly. And connecting that to the bigger picture, David's initial move really highlights a struggle that's common to, pretty much everyone, right? The study puts it like this. Though we know in our heads and our hearts that God is with us, we, like David, may still flee every now and then. It's an honest look at how fear can operate, even in people of faith.
It really makes you think about your own responses, doesn't it? When the pressure's really on, do you default to, self-preservation, escape, even when you have deeper beliefs?
Absolutely. It acknowledges that tension between, let's say, our ideals and our immediate, maybe more primal reactions.
Yeah.
But crucially, the psalm doesn't stop there. David's story doesn't end with the flight. It pivots.
Right. So after that initial, very human reaction of fleeing, how does David's perspective shift? When we look at verses 4 through 7 of Psalm 11, what happens? How does his answer change?
It's a dramatic shift. He basically stops talking about the immediate threat and starts talking about God. He answers his advisors, maybe even himself, by asserting God's total authority. He says, Adonai is in his holy temple. Adonai, his throne, is in heaven. It's like he's zooming out, way out, from the chaos on the ground to the ultimate reality.
So reminding himself and them who's really in charge.
Precisely. And it emphasizes God's awareness, his sovereignty, his eyes see, David says, and test humankind. God isn't surprised by Absalom's rebellion or the wickedness happening. He sees it all. And the implication, as the study notes, is that God will intervene on behalf of his people, the righteous. It shifts the focus from human vulnerability to divine capability.
And this section, it really paints a picture of God's character, doesn't it? It says, Adonai tests the righteous, which is interesting in itself, but he hates the wicked and the lover of violence. And then those really strong images of divine justice. He will rain hot coals down on the wicked. Fire, sulfur, and scorching wind will be what they get to drink. I mean, that's intense.
It is intense. It's a powerful affirmation that there's a moral order, that actions have consequences ultimately. It provides this stark contrast to the seeming impunity of the wicked in verse 2. And it all culminates in this declaration of God's fundamental nature. For Adonai is righteous. He loves righteousness. The upright will see his face. So in the middle of feeling like the foundations are destroyed, David finds this bedrock truth about God's character, his justice, his righteousness, his ultimate presence with those who are upright. It's the ultimate anchor.
It's really striking thinking back to what the study said about David's initial flight being a kind of failure, but then it follows up immediately with something quite hopeful about that. What's the big takeaway there?
Yeah, that's a really crucial point, I think. The study says, and this is powerful, God can even use these failures to grow us in our faith for the next time it happens.
Okay, so it's not just about messing up, it's about learning.
Yeah.
Growing through it.
Exactly. It reframes the whole idea of failure in the context of faith.
Right.
Maybe that moment of fear, that act of fleeing, wasn't the final word for David. Maybe it was part of a process. It forces us to think, doesn't it? How do we view our own moments of weakness, our own times of flight? Are they just dead ends? Or could God actually be using those very experiences to deepen our trust, maybe to prepare us for future challenges?
That's a much more, well, gracious way of looking at it, that our imperfections aren't necessarily disqualifying, but maybe part of the journey itself.
I think that's what this study is suggesting. It encourages a kind of critical thinking about our own spiritual lives, recognizing that growth often happens right in the middle of our struggles, maybe even because of our stumbles. God's work isn't limited by our perfection, thankfully.
So as we pull this all together, this deep dive into Psalm 11, guided by that faith or flight study, it really underlines how this choice, this tension, is just fundamentally human, isn't it? The study says it so clearly. As Christians, we are often faced with situations where it seems that the entire world is against us. And yeah, that feels true sometimes. During these times, it continues, we all have the same decision to make. We can choose to stand in faith, or we can take to flight out of fear. It wasn't just David's struggle, it's ours too.
Absolutely. Whether it's a huge life-altering crisis like David faced with Absalom, or maybe the more everyday anxieties and pressures that make us just want to pull the covers over our head and, flee, that dynamic is similar.
So Psalm 11 and the insights from this study, they offered this profound framework, really, a way to think about it. It acknowledges fear is real, it's natural, running might even be our first instinct. But ultimately, our true refuge, our foundation, isn't found in just escaping the circumstances, is it? It's found somewhere deeper.
It seems to point towards understanding God's character, his unwavering presence, his ultimate sovereignty, even when everything feels chaotic and out of control. It's about shifting our gaze, like David eventually did. And maybe it brings us back to that haunting question from verse 3. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Perhaps the ultimate answer isn't about a specific physical action, stand or flee, but about where our trust is fundamentally placed. Who or what is our actual foundation? That's a powerful thought to end on.
Yeah, it challenges us, I think, to reflect. Are those moments where we do feel like fleeing, where we give in to fear? Are they absolute failures? Or are they maybe just difficult steps on a longer path toward a deeper, more tested faith? A faith that holds even when it feels like everything is falling apart. It really gives you something to chew on, doesn't it? Considering where our true foundation lies, especially when things get shaky. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration of Psalm 11 and that core question of faith or flight has given you some fresh insights to think about. We appreciate you spending this time with us, digging into these important questions together. Join us again next time for another deep dive.